This video is brought to you by Squarespace, your solution to build great websites with ease. For Englishmen, morality is not yet a problem. How do we know the difference between right and wrong? What is the origin of morality? This is the fundamental question in ethics, and for a long time in Europe, the question had a conclusive answer. God decides. Morality comes from God. He created natural law, and like it or not, we humans have to abide by this law. That's where our conscience comes from, the bad feeling that we get when we engage in behavior that we know deep down is wrong. But do we? Today we're taking a look at one of the most profound sentences in all of Nietzsche's writings. The sentence in question only has a measly 8 words, but it's chock full of meaning. In this video, we're going to dive deep and analyze it. Because, as Nietzsche alludes to, somewhere along the way, morality became a problem. But not for everyone. Curiously enough, it's not a problem for Englishmen yet. As Nietzsche says, for Englishmen, morality is not yet a problem. What's that all about? Perhaps some context is in order. The sentence in question is from Twilight of the Idols, one of Nietzsche's mature works, and in my humble opinion, one of his best. But its quality comes at a cost. Nietzsche wrote Twilight of the Idols as an introduction, or rather a restatement, of his main philosophical ideas. The language is clear and concise. The book is radical in tone, as it is written late in his life. The prose is amazing, but also cryptic at times. Without a solid background in Nietzsche's ideas, many of the sentences in Twilight of the Idols can come across as mysterious. And to make matters worse, this tiny sentence appears in a paragraph that appears in a chapter where Nietzsche explicitly reacts to contemporaries, or near contemporaries, with whose ideas he has a bone to pick. The paragraph in question is titled, combatively, Skirmishes in a War with the Age. As the title might suggest, in this chapter, Nietzsche takes the hammer to a wide variety of philosophers and artists. As such, to truly understand what he's talking about, you also need some knowledge about these people, because Nietzsche doesn't give you the knowledge himself. He assumes that the reader is familiar. He talks about, for example, Thomas Carlyle, Ernest Renan, George Sand, Sainte-Beuve, Emerson, Charles Darwin. And many of these names might not sound familiar, but back in Nietzsche's day, they were among the most popular writers of the time. So people in Nietzsche's time would have been familiar with these names, but us in the 21st century, not necessarily so. The paragraph in question opens with the name of G. Eliot. This is George Eliot, a prolific and popular novelist from Victorian England, who not only wrote novels, but also translated some German works of theology that were very popular in Nietzsche's time, such as, for example, the David Strauss biography of Jesus. This book by Strauss was hugely influential, both in Germany and also in England, precisely because of Eliot's translation. It was a biography of Jesus, but it sparked controversy because Strauss claimed that the miracles that Jesus performed were simply mythical additions to the Bible, and that they were not historical events. Moreover, Eliot was greatly influenced by the theology, or rather the anthropology, of Ludwig Feuerbach, who argued that mankind's conception of the divine does not have an external source as common theology would have it, but rather that the divine is simply a product of human nature and an outward projection of it, and that humanity's evolution from polytheistic to monotheistic to atheistic reflected the sociological needs of mankind at those particular times. She translated Feuerbach's main work on Christianity and adopted many of its ideas as her own. George Eliot, thus, for Nietzsche, represents a new kind of Christian, characteristic of Victorian England as a whole. A Christianity divorced from Catholic or Protestant orthodoxy, but on the whole, more humanistic. It's debatable whether or not these people can be even called Christians at all. Maybe the label cultural Christian fits the bill. In any case, even though the paragraph starts with George Eliot's name, as if Nietzsche is addressing her specifically, he uses her more like a symbol or a type for Victorian England's theology and worldview as a whole. By attacking her, he is attacking the entire culture of Victorian England. Because lots of things were happening in Victorian England at the time. Christianity was on the way out, or at least it was losing cultural ground, in no small part because of George Eliot's translations. But in other domains too, Christianity was losing influence. It's the era of Charles Darwin, who proposed a radically new origin of mankind, completely devoid of the creative hand of God. And it's also the era of John Stuart Mill and the utilitarians, philosophers who sought a foundation for ethics that does not depend upon the existence of a Christian God to enforce the boundaries of good and evil, to reward the virtuous and punish the wicked. And it's against these moralists who do away with the Christian God and seek to find a foundation elsewhere that Nietzsche wages war. In short, he argues that they simply didn't think things through. They are completely blind to the problem that morality has become. Let's dive in and see what that problem is all about. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Squarespace. With Squarespace, you can create an entire website from scratch in just a few minutes. Because of their wide variety of templates, you can set up a website for just about any purpose in a matter of minutes. I'm having fun building my own website on their platform, and it was as easy as picking a template, like a landing page to collect emails for a book club, or to set up a video catalog where I can post members-only videos that don't make it to YouTube. They have a comprehensive blogging interface as well, which I might use to write book and movie reviews, or just to keep track of my own ramblings. Everything is drag and drop, which makes for a smooth experience. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Weltgeist to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace, and now back to the English. Nietzsche says they don't yet realize that morality has become a problem. What did he mean by that? God is dead, and we have killed him. So goes the famous Nietzschean phrase. The second half is as important as the first. We have killed him. God died by humanity's hand. What did Nietzsche mean by this? He says that we have no need for God anymore. Advancements in the sciences, most notably the theory of evolution proposed by Darwin, seem to have made God superfluous, a relic from a bygone age, back when humanity hadn't yet mastered the mysteries of biology, physics, and chemistry. The phrase was as much a declaration as a prophecy. Evidently, the vast majority of Europeans still believed in God in the late 1800s, when Nietzsche coined the phrase. But it's not about self-identified belief in God. It's about what God represents, and what God will represent in the future. Nietzsche foresaw a great cataclysm with the death of God. He knew that God, or rather the Christian worldview as a whole, was a foundational building block for our entire European culture. And you simply can't take away the foundation of a building and also leave the building intact. But that's precisely what Nietzsche accuses Victorian England of doing. Let's be more specific. The Christian worldview is a total system, and it builds upon God as its core idea. Obviously, without God, there is no Christianity. And God has two important functions in this worldview. First, he explains the state of the world. He is the condition for its existence. But secondly, he also gives us a moral framework. But that moral framework is dependent upon the metaphysical foundation provided by God. If that foundation gets removed, then God's moral precepts also lose their normative power. To put it simply, if you stop believing in God because the sciences can explain the world well enough, then why should you continue to listen to God's commandments? And yet, despite this loss of prominence for God, it seems that people nevertheless cling to God's rules all the same. That is the contradiction that Nietzsche finds at the heart of the moral culture of Victorian England. They stop believing in God, yet they hang on to his morality all the more. What is happening here? This is the crux of the paragraph in question. They are rid of the Christian God and therefore think it all the more incumbent upon them to hold tight to Christian morality. This is an English way of reasoning. So, what happened here? In essence, Nietzsche argues that these new moralities, these moralities ostensibly free from theology, are actually not so emancipated at all. They are still beholden to Christian values. We can imagine Nietzsche saying something like the following: you get rid of God and try to create a morality without his influence. But then, what a surprise, your new morality looks suspiciously much like the Christian one. How convenient that your objective and neutral atheistic investigations into morality end up affirming none other than the Christian morality. He accused his German predecessor, Kant, of doing the same thing. On the surface, Kant conducted a rational, objective investigation into morality, and he arrived at his famous categorical imperative. But all that the categorical imperative seems to do, in practice, is to reaffirm Christian morality. Nietzsche asks the question, what was the point of getting rid of the Christian God if all you do in the process is simply recreate his morality by other means? What was everything about? Was it all for nothing? So these English moralists agree that it's naive, maybe even stupid, to believe in God in face of all the progress of natural science. Yet, when it comes to his rules on how to behave, God is completely vindicated and absolutely correct in every way. What a strange coincidence. If the English really believe that they know intuitively and of their own accord what is good and evil, if, therefore, they assert that they no longer need Christianity as a guarantee of morality, this in itself is simply the outcome of the dominion of Christian valuations and a proof of the strength and profundity of this dominion. This is the meat of the matter. The belief in God has become so ingrained, its influence so pervasive, that even if we ostensibly get rid of our belief in God, his morality stays with us, like a tradition that sticks around long after the original reason for the tradition has vanished. Compare it to vestigial organs or behaviors in humans. Goosebumps, for example, served a function back when human bodies were covered in hair, either making us appear larger to scare off predators or to keep the body warm when it's cold. We have lost the majority of our body hair, but the goosebumps behavior still remains. In a similar way, we stopped believing in God, but his morality remains. In Nietzsche's phraseology, we still live in his shadow. But of course, this presents a problem. What right to existence does this Christian morality have, if there is no Christian God to support it? When Nietzsche says, this is an English way of reasoning, he wants to say that the English moralists of the Victorian age have not yet conceived of this problem. Their morality is vestigial. The original justification for its existence has ceased to exist, and they are living in its afterglow without realizing that their beliefs are on shaky ground, bound to fall apart at the tiniest scrutiny. For Englishmen, morality is not yet a problem. Not yet a problem indeed, because the death of God, as Nietzsche makes clear, is a slow historical process that will take its time to unfold and become manifest. Its consequences are not immediately clear. Just like we see lightning first and hear thunder only later, so will the death of God, although we may recognize it today, not show its full ramifications, perhaps until centuries down the line. Utilitarianism, socialism, democracy criticizes the origin of moral valuations, but it believes them just as much as the Christian does. Naivete, as if morality could survive when the God who sanctions it is missing. Nietzsche wrote in Ecce Homo that he lived 200 years before his time, as he seemed to believe that his prophecy about the death of God would take some time to be truly felt as the big cataclysmic event that it was. So far, he seems to be correct, even in the 21st century so far, and certainly with regards to Victorian England. If Nietzsche wrote in 1888 that morality is not yet a problem for English moralists, then maybe today it has become a problem, but only ever so slightly. Philosophy today still struggles with the question of providing a solid basis for morality. Some argue it's impossible. Others argue that other avenues are possible, even non-transcendent ones. It's doubtful, however, that a morality based on reason can ever be found and also withstand scrutiny. But that's a discussion for another video. The obvious question is, what next? Nietzsche wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra as a prophecy for the future, whereas most of his other works are concerned with the past, examining philosophical idols that stand in need of destruction. With Zarathustra, Nietzsche looks forward. To be perfectly clear, with the destruction of Christian morality, and this includes philosophies like English utilitarianism, which, in Nietzsche's view, is merely a repackaged Christianity, Nietzsche doesn't seek a new common ground for a moral system as such. At heart, Nietzsche is an individualist, and he abhors the masses, and he hates philosophical systems that throw out blanket rules for everyone to follow, such as Kant's categorical imperative or the Christian Ten Commandments. The only thing that matters is that the Ubermensch of the future will assert his power over reality. There's lots in that sentence to unpack. First, it's the only thing that matters. The Ubermensch is the central point in Nietzsche's vision of the future. He is the nucleus around which all the rest orbits. Second, the Ubermensch is a product of the future. Nietzsche speaks of his appearance as a future occasion, the next step in the evolution of mankind. We can look to figures of the past for inspiration, and some come very close to the ideal, but as yet no one has truly dared to step beyond good and evil in the manner that Nietzsche apparently wants us to do. Third, the Ubermensch is all about power. With some reservation, we can think about historic figures such as Napoleon, Caesar, Cesare Borgia, but it's also not necessarily about power in the conventional political sense. Nietzsche also mentions Goethe and Shakespeare as possible inspirations. Fourth, the Ubermensch deals in reality. That might sound obvious, but it's very important for Nietzsche that the Ubermensch deals with this world, the material world of the here and the now, and that he doesn't concern himself with imaginary beyond worlds, like the Christian heaven, the Kantian world in itself, or the Schopenhauerian will. In fact, the gradual realization of mankind that the Christian world might be the product of our imagination, and the subsequent realizations that other such proposed beyond worlds, like those of Kant or Plato, might also be imaginary, is precisely the point at which the world becomes ready for Zarathustra's arrival. We have suppressed the true world. What world survives? The apparent world, perhaps? Certainly not. In abolishing the true world, we have also abolished the world of appearance. Noon, the moment of the shortest shadows, the end of the longest error, mankind's zenith. Incipit Zarathustra. This focus on reality, as opposed to a focus on an imaginary world, is perhaps the most important feature of the Ubermensch, and it explains how Nietzsche can also fit artists like Shakespeare and Goethe into its archetype. The focus on reality is so important even that a litmus test for a would-be Ubermensch would be the passing of a thought experiment that Nietzsche proposed in The Joyful Science, and that is, of course, the infamous eternal return. If, one night, a demon came to visit you and told you that this life that you have lived and will live will repeat itself again and again, every time in the exact same sequence forever and ever, how would you react to this information? Would you curse the demon or embrace him? Nietzsche argues that only the Ubermensch, literally a superhuman, could without a doubt and with a lot of enthusiasm answer yes to this demon. The idea that this life must be lived again and again, including every moment of suffering and pain, is just too much to bear for normal humans. But someone who can say yes to this, who can affirm life in the most extreme way, who can, despite all the pain and suffering and boredom and absurdity that life brings, who can say yes to life despite or even because of all these things, that person would be something more than human. It is the affirmation of life in its most extreme form, the polar opposite of Schopenhauer's ideal of extreme life denial. The Ubermensch would be like a child who goes on a roller coaster ride and who, as soon as the ride is over, loudly shouts, "Again, again." That's how the Ubermensch looks at life. When all is said and done, he must joyfully and proudly express his wish to do it all over again. That would be a true affirmation of life. And it all hinges upon a complete embrace of the world as it presents itself to us in all its nakedness. No hidden world of ideas, no heaven in the afterlife, and no mysterious will or world in itself to console ourselves if things don't go our way. For Nietzsche, This requires a psychological constitution that is simply superhuman. Imagine you get a cancer diagnosis, or you learn that your spouse has cheated on you, or that your child has died in a tragic accident. A true Ubermensch would, in this moment of deep despair and hopelessness, in the face of all that suffering and pain, still say yes. Yes, I want this again, and again, and again, forever. Is such a thing even possible? Who knows? The point is, everything that we just talked about, the death of God, the coming of the Ubermensch, the prophecies of Zarathustra, these are future events. Nietzsche wanted to make clear that the English, with all their efforts, evolution in biology, utilitarianism in philosophy, and humanism in religion, were engaging in the most fruitless endeavor imaginable to provide a justification for Christian morals without the Christian God, a mission that is doomed to fail. The fact that this realization has not sunk in yet, but that it seems inevitable that it will eventually do so, is what Nietzsche captures in the phrase, "For Englishmen, morality is not yet a problem." Unbeknownst to them, a great moral crisis is coming, and they are still happily going about their lives as if nothing's amiss, as if everything is going well, with all their supposed advancements in science and philosophy. They are in for a rude awakening. We are in for a rude awakening, as we live in the afterglow of the death of God, the strange twilight zone of the long silence between lightning and thunder, as nihilism looms over us and threatens to swallow us whole, unless, or perhaps until, the age of Zarathustra begins. Thank you for watching. And thank you to our Patreons for their tireless support that keeps the channel alive. If you enjoy the work we do here on the channel, consider becoming a supporter. You'll get access to a dozen or so Patreon exclusive videos that mostly deal with subjects that are too niche or too spicy for YouTube. Your likes and subscribes are also invaluable forms of support as they help the channel reach more people. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.